Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of Canal Days. As always, I'm your host, Carrie, along with my co-host, founder of Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. Our Canal Days series delves into the vast collection of historical sites throughout Massachusetts, with Robert's expertise of the local history as our personal guide. Each episode, we uncover history throughout local communities, highlighting their historic landmarks and uncovering their seminal significance. Today's episode of Canal Days will be discussing the Stevens Cemetery, located in Pelham, Massachusetts. So, can you detail the specific features throughout this cemetery?
Well, there's a lot of them, and that includes a holding tomb. And Pelham has two holding tombs. These are locations which hold the body during the 4 cold months of the year, since the ground is frozen. Since 1920, it's not necessary to use these, but before that, you had to have one, at least one, in every community. Since Pelham is very mountainous, it needed two, the one on the north the southern edge and the northern edge. And they still are around. And Stevens happened to have one of those. So today we're going to talk about the specifics of the cemetery and about the layout, and then compared to other cemeteries around Pelham itself. And this really cool feature of a holding tomb is towards the front of the cemetery, and it's blocked up with an iron, very big iron gate or door, so it's all closed up. Now, when you're very close up to it, and this is a beautiful rectangular cemetery. It's raised up like almost every cemetery in Pelham, and since it's a very hilly and mountainous location, Pelham cemeteries, to support the soil where the burials are, but almost all their cemeteries surrounded by very strong stone walls embedded into the grass structure, so that the surface above it is very flat. Else you would have coffins dislodged from the soil and a lot of gravestones that would collapse over. So you don't have that problem here in the cemetery. So it's a very nice one to visit. I would call it rather small, but there's a lot of burials inside of it, and it's worth the visit itself.
So, describe the specifics of the Stevens Cemetery.
Yes, it's from the year 1843, which means that it's after the time they would use any footstones, so there's only headstones in the cemetery. It's located on Packardsville Road, which is in the deep south of Pelham itself. There's another cemetery on this road. It also goes by a second name called the Smith Private Burial Ground, and that's the older name. Nowadays it's named after the Stevens family. It, like I mentioned, had that holding tomb within it. Now, to find it, you shouldn't have too much trouble, but I do have the coordinates on my webpage that you can check out. Now, almost every burial is before 1908, and there's only two modern burials since 1908. And that's because most of the people of Pelham are being buried in the Valley Cemetery of Pelham. And so it's an old one, and thus there's a lot of brownstones to check out. Now, since it's called the Stevens Cemetery, the Stevens family inside here is the family of Abiel Stevens, Abial. And he has a nice family grave plot within the cemetery. There's a lot of small stones, and there's probably also a lot of burials which don't have stones at all. And that's because Pelham is not a wealthy community. And so a lot of the oldest burials in this cemetery, all the cemeteries of Pelham, don't have stones at all. They might have had wooden crosses at one point, or they might have field stones, and a lot of those are now gone. So this is a very worthwhile place to visit, and do so, please.
And stick around, we'll be right back after this quick announcement. Are you fascinated by local history and eager to investigate the obscure treasures off the beaten path throughout the state of Massachusetts? or maybe just seeking an unforgettable cultural activity for family and friends to enjoy, look no further than Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, founded by Robert Comeau. With over a decade of experience, Robert offers captivating tours and presentations of historic sites and landmarks throughout the state. Whether you're interested in canals, cemeteries, charming churches, or more, Robert's tours provide a unique and enriching experience for all. And that's not it. You can also schedule private tours tailored to your interests, ensuring a personalized adventure and unforgettable memories. Perfect for families or groups of all sizes, making for an exciting hands-on learning experience that brings history to life. Simply visit holyokecanaltour.org or email bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com to book your private tour today. So, getting back to our episode on the Stevens Cemetery of Pelham, Massachusetts, illustrate the cemetery's layout for us to get a mental picture.
Yeah, since it's a neighborhood cemetery, most of neighborhood cemeteries have groupings by family, and this one does too. So you'll see the Smith plot in a section, the Stevens plot in another section. But remember, also it has to be a functional cemetery. There's probably a potter's field in the back, yes, and a baby section. And there's around the fence that's surrounded, there's a little metal pipe railing, and that's one of the other features about it. So it's a really cool cemetery in that sense. And the best thing you possibly do is go visit all of Pelham Cemetery, and that's where you get to see that there's a lot of similarity between them, and also a lot of differences. So keep that in mind as much as possible. Now it is oriented on the east-west axis, where the gravestones would point towards the west itself, and so thus it has what that oriented. So there's a lot of symmetry inside this cemetery, as expected.
And define some of the major differences and similarities between the Stevens cemetery and other cemeteries throughout Pelham, Massachusetts.
Some of the similarities are that it's a raised cemetery with a stone wall around it. This one's slightly different because it also has a metal post. And it's very flat, like most of the cemeteries in Pelham are, because they have to be, like I mentioned. If you have a hill nearby and soil starts to come into this, then graves will be covered with a foot or two of soil very quickly. And also, if you want a slope, the bodies would start to dislodge from their location. And so they have to make sure that it's level. To do that in a hilly area, put a very strong stone wall around it. And check it every year, make sure that's in great shape. And almost every cemetery in Pelham is like that. Now, it's one of only two with a holding tomb, so for that reason it's a little different from the others. It's also quite a bit off the road by a few feet, so that too is very, very specific to Pelham. They like to put theirs into the woods as much as possible. And it's also a neighborhood cemetery, so you can come up with a lot of similar names throughout this cemetery. But a lot of Pelham's cemetery are neighborhood cemeteries. So it's going to be within that cemetery that you're looking at to be a lot of names that repeat over and over again because families were clustered around given areas. Pelham is a very hard place to get around, so you're not going to have burials of one family in another neighborhood cemetery. So Pelham is very special with its cemeteries, very enjoyable to visit every one of them, and this one is too.
And thanks for listening to Canal Days and our episode on the Stevens Cemetery in Pelham, Massachusetts, and joining us on our journey through the rich history of the Connecticut River Valley. We hope you enjoyed uncovering some of the hidden and overlooked marvels and their fascinating stories that shaped our past and the state of Massachusetts. A special thanks to Robert Comeau, founder of Historical Tours of Greater Holyoke, for sharing his passion and expertise with us. Remember, you can find more information about Robert's tours, book private tours, and explore the Canal Days video and podcast series at holyokecanaltour.org. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please like, comment, and share. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions for future episodes. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to tune to our next episode of Canal Days. Until next time.